Hey there, Anthony here with the Piano Dojo, weekly piano proficiency videos. And we're actually going to have a pretty easy week this week. I think we finally have hit that cruising altitude, and there's not going to be too much new information being introduced now until we finish the circle of fifths with our scales and we actually get into the next unit, which is going to be all about chords, everything chords, right? So we're just going to hang tight in this cycle. Today we're going to start with the usual syncopation rhythmic warm-up. Then we're going to move on to our circle of fifths and add the next two scales, which are going to be E major and B major. And then we're going to work on some sight reading with another little classical piece. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, here we go. Week 3 rhythm warm-up. Things are really moving along now, so this is going to move nice and quick. We won't have to do too much explaining at all. We'll be working on more syncopation. And as usual, we're going to start with our metronome at 40 BPM. And the click will symbolize the downbeats. So here we go. We'll get the metronome started. We're going to read line 1, and we're going to start with our right hand on the top rhythmic line. And it's going to go like this. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and now we're going to change our hands. 1, and 2, and 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and top line hands together. Here we go. 1, and 2, and 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. There we go. Now we're going to move down to line 2, and we will turn our metronome up to 45 BPM. And now remember, without changing anything in the actual metronome, we are going to imagine in our heads that this click is on the upbeat. All right, so it'll go like this. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and change hands. 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and hands together top line. 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. Excellent. See, this doesn't take too long when you don't have to explain things constantly, right? It's just a nice, easy process. Let's move on to line 3 now. And what we're going to do is we are going to technically move up to 50 BPM, but we're going to take 2 of our metronome training wheels off. And so therefore, we're going to put the metronome on half time. So we'll put it on 25, and then we're going to read the third line. And we're going to imagine that these clicks of the metronome are on the first and the third downbeats. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, 4, 1, 3. Switch hands. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3. Top line hands together. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and there we go. I love that last measure there because it leaves a big space. And one funny thing I've noticed working with students on these over the years is that when you're actually going and you're playing, it's actually pretty easy because it's much easier to keep your place when your body is in motion. The hardest thing and the place where I find the most mistakes are made are in the gaps, in the rests, and especially that last measure there where you have a nice big long rest. It's all on you to keep that tempo internalized because your arms aren't feeling it for you. So last but not least, we're going to go up to 60 BPM, but we're going to keep our metronome on halftime, so therefore it will only be clicking at 30 BPM. And now we're going to get a little jazzy, right? And we're going to imagine that these clicks are on the 2 and the 4. Just like with the upbeats, we're actually not changing anything with the metronome to do this. The metronome is clicking at its rate, and we are imagining with our right brain that these beats are the 2 and the 4, the second and the fourth downbeat. So without further ado, let's do line 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3. Switch hands. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3. Top line hands together. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and there we go. So that's our rhythmic warm-up. Remember, you can download this warm-up from my website, pianodojo.com. And now let's head back over to the piano. So let's go ahead and get started with our E major scale. So here you can see we're still going to be using the original finger pattern that we started with on the key of C. But as we get into the key of B, we are going to make a tweak to it, and these will be our last two scales that do use this finger pattern. We will be changing it next week, but don't worry about that. It's very simple. All right. So let's talk about E major. All right. 4 black notes here, and so let's go ahead and add that to our circle. So first of all, we know that E is the so of A, B, C sharp, D, E. Do, re, mi, fa, so. Right? So there's our 5th. And then our sharps are going to have, we're going to keep the 3 sharps from the key of A. So we have F, we have C, we have G, and then we're going to add, just like the sharps are moving in the 5ths, F, C, G, we're going to have a D sharp. Let's start with our right hand. And so we'll set that up. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, lift, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back down, and then the chord. Now remember, you can, once you get comfortable with the lift, you can tuck your thumb just a little bit or bring your middle finger over just a little bit, but we don't want to twist the wrist and we don't want to twist the elbow. So here's our left hand. There we go. And then of course, once you get comfortable with that, you can try putting it hands together. we go. Now, as you can see, we have do, re, mi, fa, so. So B is going to be on our next scale. We'll be adding the B, and this will be our last sharp key. So we're going to keep the F sharp, we're going to keep the C sharp, we're going to keep the G sharp, keep the G sharp, keep the D sharp, and finally we will add, as you can see our fifth pattern, we will add A sharp. All right? Now, I have a very special theory about the bottom of the circle, and as you can notice, that's one of the topics on the list today, the bottom of the circle. And when I'm saying that, I'm referring to the bottom three scales. I think that these are the least understood scales of music, and especially among pianists, we tend to fear them because we can see that those sharps, and as we'll soon see, flats, really pile up down there at the bottom, right? And when you see that, you immediately think, oh no, you know, how am I going to remember all of those sharps and flats when I'm playing the piano? But there is something special that, if you think about it the right way, makes these actually the easiest keys. And the reason for that is that the bottom three scales use all 5 black keys, right? And if there's 7 notes in a scale, do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, right? 7 unique notes in the scale. 5 of them are black. You only have to remember 2 white notes. So the bottom 3 scales use all 5 black keys. You only need to remember 2 white keys. All right? So that is why these bottom 3 are so simple, because 5 of the notes are already sticking up out of the piano and looking at you. This is important because when we're playing the piano, we're not thinking about notes and theory. The thing that most pianists are thinking about when they're actually in the act of making music are the visual shapes of the scales and the chords, right? So this is a very visual process, and therefore now we can see that using our visual memory, we can really simplify how we see these scales that appear to be really hairy at first because they've got so many sharps, but actually that makes them even easier, okay? So let's take a look at B major. Now I want you to notice first that if we look at the finger table, that we are going to have an alternative left-hand finger pattern, all right? We're only going to use our 4 fingers. Unfortunately, our pinky is not going to get to participate today on this scale, but that's all right. So let's go ahead and switch over to the piano view, and let's take a look at what this one looks like. Okay, we're going to start with our right hand, and this will be a normal finger pattern, just like the key of C. Remember, we're only going to have to worry about 2 white notes, and it's going to go something like this. Right? Here's your 5 black keys. And the only 2 white keys that you have to remember are these 2, B and E. Let's try our left hand now. Now here we go. I'm putting my 4th finger on the B, and it's going to go like this. Perfect. And let's put that hands together. You don't have to do this right away. You can have a few days of practice on this if you're not comfortable at first, but once you get there, it'll be something like this. So there's our scales for the day. Pretty easy. And now we're going to move on, and we're going to look at sight reading. We'll do a harmonic analysis of this, and we're going to add one more little element that we haven't talked about yet to reading, and that is the concept of dynamics, right? Because music can be loud and it can be soft, and there's so much magic that you can create with the concept of getting louder and softer and everything in between. As you can see, the first thing that we need to do is figure out what key we're in. So we look over here at our key signature and we see nothing there. And so we know that that correlates with the only scale on the circle of fifths that has nothing in the key signature, which would be our 12 o'clock position, the people's key, C major, all right? So we're in C major, and now remember, with harmony, especially at these beginning stages, what we want to do is we're only worried about the 1, and we're only worried about the 5. So if we go ahead and give ourselves a little key up here, we know that our 1 chord is going to be C, E, G, and if we look at that note right there, the G, we know that that's the so of the scale, which is the 5, right? And so we know that our 5 is going to be a G chord, which would be G, B, and D. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to hunt through each one of these measures, and we're going to see which one of these chords, each measure's notes, lines up with the best, okay? So the first thing that we see in this first measure is just a bunch of C's. So you really can't get any more 1 than that. It is nothing but the note C, and so therefore we are going to label that with a 1, all right? In the very next measure, we can see that in the bass clef, we have a B, and in the treble clef, we have 4 G's. Well, if we look, we can tell that that definitely lines up closer to the 5, so we will label that measure a 5, all right? Now, in this next measure, we do see something that we haven't seen yet, all right? And that's the idea of non-chord tones, all right? So over here, we're gonna see some non-chord tones, and that's actually a really great thing, right? Because if we could only ever use the 3 notes of the chord to build our songs, then it would be really boring, right? We need ways to connect those notes and play around those notes. Of course, we are always looking for those skeleton embedded within the notes, but we're going to begin to experience more and more non-chord tones that don't factor into the harmony, right? So in this sense, we have a specific type of non-chord tone, right? Because we can see that we have a lot of C. We notice that C is in the bass, and therefore remember, harmony is a bottom to top hierarchy. So if it has a C in the bass, that's already a pretty good indication that it's going to be the 1. We can see that there's an E in the melody up there, and then we have 2 tiny little 8th notes, and those are the only 2 that don't fit into the C chord, that F and that D, right? So we can just ignore them and not factor them into our harmonic analysis because they're just passing, right? They're just little neighbors and passing tones, you know, right there, just a little going up and back down to the E and then bridging the gap between the E and the C right there. So we will call this measure a 1. Oops, put it under there. And then moving right along, back here, there's no ambiguity here. We can tell that with our G and our D that we're back to a 5. All right. Now this is a very interesting thing. Already, this harmony is looking very different than the first piece that we analyzed, Carefree, where we had sort of more of a linear buildup of the tension and then a resolution at the very end. In this case, we are flip-flopping our tension and we're building it up and releasing it within each measure. We're going to come back and talk about the last measure of this top line in just a moment, but I would like to continue on and finish out this piece before we get there. So if we look at the first measure of the second system, we're going to notice we're going to see the B in the bass, and we're going to see the G up top, and so we're going to label that a 5. We can see our C, our middle C, and our E in the next measure, so we're going to call that a 1. Uh-oh, it looks like in this case we have some more non-chord tones, but we can notice that we have a G in the bass and we have D's up here. This is already setting off some red flags to me that we're dealing with a 5. So we could probably go ahead and disregard the notes that I didn't circle because they're just little tiny 8th notes that aren't going to make a big difference. All right, and then what is this F doing? Well, this is actually a really fascinating concept that we are going to talk about very soon, but it is a modification to the sound of the 5 because we have gotten to the 5, but this is the last 5. So we want it to be very tense. We want to pull the tension even more. So with that F, what we're doing is we're adding just a little bit more tension to the sound of the 5, and we are calling it a dominant 7th, right? Remember we talked about the word dominant. It means it's anything over on that tension side of the musical spectrum. And the symbol for that is a 5-7, all right? Now don't worry, it's a little bit of a new piece of terminology, but we will thoroughly cover chords that have extra notes in them that add tension, that add color, right? So today I just want you to know that we would call this a 5/7 because it is extra tense, and if you play a G chord and you add an F to it, you can hear that it's very tense and it wants to resolve to that C, right? All right, fantastic. And then, of course, the beauty of knowing all of this stuff is that we anticipate what's coming up. We don't even need to look at the next notes to know that all this tension is being built up. It wants to resolve to the 1. So without even looking at the notes, you can put a 1, go up and check your hypothesis and see that we've got a bunch of C's right there and that we are on the 1, okay? So this is a very different already way of using the 1 and the 5 than the first way that we saw with Carefree. And I would like to point out one last thing before we go here, and that is that on this measure, what we have is the end of a phrase. But it's not the end, it's not ending this phrase on the 1. And because of that, it's telling our ears that the piece is not over. So whereas Carefree built up the tension and then released it on the 1, built up the tension, released it on the 1, we basically had 2 complete sentences with Carefree. What we have with determination is more of a compound sentence because our ears, regardless of whether or not you've been trained in music, we've been listening to these rules our whole lives. And so when you hear a 5, you instinctively know that the song is not over. The tension has not been released. So this is a compound sentence. This is an open cadence. And when we get to the end of the first phrase of determination, we know that we have to keep going and get to the 1. Let's put our hands on this piece now. So we're going to come over here to the piano and we're going to set our right hand up on C major position, and we're going to start on the C above middle C. All right, now I want you to notice something. The first 4 measures of determination use 3 very familiar notes. We start with this note in the first measure, our second measure goes up to this top note here, and then our middle note, the first 2 notes of measure 3, we have the major chord right there. And that's something that I definitely want you to notice because the reason that we're studying the way we are is that we don't want to have to always be counting lines and spaces to know what we're playing. We want to see and recognize these shapes. Oh, I see a space, space, space. That's the chord, and therefore you don't have to try so hard to read, but rather you're pulling these things out of your vocabulary. All right, so let's get started. We're gonna start with our right hand, and our thumb is gonna be on those 4 C's, and it'll go like this. Perfect. All right. Now, the left hand is not going to be as exciting as we've seen so far, but it is nonetheless very important. We're going to actually set our thumb on middle C. So we will be in a reverse C position, if you will, where our 5 fingers are lined up with the last 5 notes of the key of C instead of the first 5. We'll start with our thumb on that middle C. Then we're going to go down just 1 note to B and back up to C. And now we need to go down to G, which is going to be our 4th finger, all right? Now we're going to go back up to our B on our 2nd finger and up to our thumb. And finally, we'll go down to our pinky on that F, walk up to our 4th finger, and then back to our thumb. There you go. So practice that as many times as you need until you get comfortable, and then we're going to want to be putting it hands together like this. One last thing before we go, I want to draw your attention to these spaces right here. We see those letters and they indicate dynamics, all right? And so many times composers will tell us when they want things to be loud, when they want things to be soft, and they're indicated by these letters. So the first letter we see is an F, and that stands for forte, and that will be the top of our spectrum, the loudest that you can get. All right, underneath forte, sometimes you will see the letter P. And you know what, well, let's use our lowercase letters here. All right, when you see a letter P, guess what? That stands for piano. Okay, and piano is the other end of our spectrum. It is soft. So we have a spectrum between forte and piano. Now in that third dynamic, we do see that we have an M, right? Because there is a spectrum between forte and piano. So the M basically stands for medium. So if you see MF, that would stand for mezzo forte. And MP would stand for mezzo piano, medium soft, medium loud. We'll see lots of different dynamics as we continue to study, but today we're going to be dealing with loud, medium soft, and then loud again. All right, so once you get good at your hands together, then you can add that one last layer, a little bit of finesse, and do some dynamics. So there we go. That wraps up our week 3 lesson. Not too hard, not too much new information today. Remember, if you would like to download any of these tables, outlines, warm-ups, or pieces of sheet music, you can do so at my website, pianodojo.com. Happy practicing, and I'll see you next week.